The Empire had ruled the stars for 300 cycles. Their silver-scaled warriors had crushed 17 star systems under their heel. No species had ever resisted them for more than a single rotation of their home planet. They were patient, powerful, and absolutely certain of their superiority. When their scout ships detected strange radio signals coming from a small blue planet orbiting an ordinary yellow star, they did not worry. They had seen this before. Primitive species always made noise before they learned to be silent. Admiral stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and watched the blue planet grow larger on his viewing screen. His silver scales gleamed under the cold lights of his ship. He had conquered 6 worlds personally. This would be his 7th. "What do we know about them?" he asked his tactical officer. "They call themselves humans, Admiral. Carbon-based life forms. Average of 80 cycles. They have primitive space travel but have not left their own system. They spend most of their time fighting each other." Made a sound that passed for laughter among his kind. Fighting each other. How convenient. They are already divided. This will be simple. Far below, on the surface of Earth, Captain Park stood on the observation deck of the International Space Station Perseverance. She was 34 years old. She had been a fighter pilot before becoming an astronaut. She had seen many strange things in her career, but nothing had prepared her for what appeared in the darkness of space above the moon. The warship was massive. It was shaped like a curved blade, silver and gleaming, at least 3 kilometers long. Felt her heart stop for a moment. Then it started beating again, faster than before. "Mission Control," she said into her radio, keeping her voice steady with great effort. "We have contact. Repeat, we have contact. Unknown vessel, approximately 3 kilometers in length, holding position above lunar orbit." The response came back filled with static and confusion. Within an hour, every telescope on Earth was pointed at the sky. Within 2 hours, the world knew they were not alone. They broadcast their message on every frequency. It was translated automatically by their systems into every major human language. The message was simple and direct. "Inhabitants of the 3rd planet, you are now subjects of the Empire. You will surrender all planetary resources. You will submit to integration into our systems. You will obey all commands from your new masters. You have 72 hours to comply. Resistance will result in annihilation. This is your only warning." The message repeated every hour for the next 3 days. In Seoul, the United Earth Council gathered in emergency session. Leaders from every nation sat around a massive circular table. Some were angry, some were frightened, some were both. Defense Minister sat quietly and listened to everyone speak. He was 61 years old, a small man with hair and calm eyes. He had survived 3 wars in his lifetime. He had learned that the loudest voices were rarely the. Generals demanded immediate military response. Scientists explained that human weapons could not scratch hull plating. Politicians argued about who should speak for humanity. Religious leaders prayed. Economists calculated the cost of surrender versus resistance. When everyone had finished speaking, Minister raised his hand. The room fell silent. "Have they studied our history?" he asked. The question confused everyone. The American representative frowned. "What do you mean?" This said, "Have they looked at our past? Have they seen what we do when someone threatens our homes? Have they studied our wars, our revolutions, our struggles? Do they know about Thermopylae, Stalingrad, the Warsaw Uprising? Do they understand what kind of species they are threatening?" Nobody answered. Nobody had thought to ask. Nodded slowly. They see a small planet, they see primitive technology, they see a species that fights itself. They think this makes us weak. He paused and looked around the table. They are wrong. The fact that we fight each other means we are very, very good at fighting. The fact that we are still here means we are very, very good at surviving. These aliens have given us 72 hours to surrender. I suggest we use that time wisely. For the next 3 days, the world held its breath. Factories that had been idle roared back to life. Soldiers who had been discharged returned to duty. Scientists who had been rivals began working together. Old enemies set aside their differences. They watched from orbit and waited for the surrender that they were certain would come. Park remained on the space station, watching the alien fleet through her telescope. She counted the ships, 12 in total, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built, each one carrying weapons that could level a city in seconds. The math was not in humanity's favor, but had learned long ago that math was not everything. On the 72nd hour, Minister stood before the United Earth Council one final time. "We have made our decision," he said. "We have consulted with every nation. We have listened to every voice. We are in agreement." "And?" the British representative asked. Smiled, it was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had made peace with what was coming. "We fight." On the 73rd hour, exactly 1 hour after the deadline had passed, every satellite dish on Earth turned toward the fleet. Every radio transmitter, every communications array, every device capable of sending a signal into space broadcast the same message. It was transmitted in 47 languages. It was 3 words long. "We decline." Admiral received the message on his bridge. He read it 3 times, certain that his translation systems had made an error. No species had ever refused the ultimatum, not once in 300 cycles of conquest. He turned to his tactical officer with confusion in his yellow eyes. "What does this mean?" he asked. His officer checked the translation again. "It means they refuse to surrender, Admiral. They are choosing to fight." Stared at the blue planet below. For the first time in his long career, he felt something he did not recognize. It was a cold sensation in his chest. It was the beginning of doubt. "Very well," he said finally. "If they wish to die, we will grant their wish. Begin the bombardment." Far below, Park watched the alien ships begin to move. She knew what was coming. She knew that millions of people were about to die, but she also knew something else, something that they did not understand and could not predict. Humanity had just begun to fight. The first day of the war was the worst day in human history. Admiral ordered his fleet to fire on 3 major cities as a demonstration of power. He expected that watching their homes burn would break the humans and force them to surrender. He was wrong. The beams of light that fell from the sky were brighter than the sun. They struck without warning and without mercy. In seconds, millions of lives ended. Buildings that had stood for centuries became dust. Families were erased. Entire neighborhoods vanished. The world watched in horror as the smoke rose from the ruins. But something strange happened in the hours that followed. The survivors did not beg for peace. They did not flee. They did not hide. Instead, they got angry. In South Korea, a 67-year-old retired engineer named Lee watched the news reports with tears streaming down her wrinkled face. She had spent 40 years working on theoretical physics. She had written papers about warp fields and energy disruption that nobody had taken seriously. She had been called a dreamer, a fool, a waste of resources. Now, watching her world burn, she decided that being called names no longer mattered. She picked up her phone and called her former students. "Come to my warehouse," she said. "Bring everyone you know. We have work to do." Within 12 hours, had assembled a team of 32 young scientists and engineers. They had no military training. They had no government funding. They had a converted warehouse filled with old equipment and a whiteboard covered in equations that most people could not understand. They use a navigation system based on quantum entanglement, explained to her team. "If we can disrupt the field, their ships will lose their ability to coordinate. They will become blind and deaf." A young man named raised his hand. "Professor Lee, that is theoretically possible, but we would need equipment that does not exist." Smiled. "Then we will build it. We have 36 hours before their next attack. That is plenty of time." It was not plenty of time. It was barely enough time. The team worked without sleep, without rest, without hope. They built devices from spare parts and broken machines. They tested theories that had never been proven. They failed again and again and again. And then, on the 35th hour, they succeeded. The disruption field activated with a sound like thunder. The effect was invisible but devastating. 17 ships suddenly lost their navigation systems. They drifted out of formation, crashing into each other, spinning wildly in the vacuum of space. Admiral watched his tactical display with growing horror. "What is happening?" he demanded. "Report." His officers had no answers. Their instruments showed nothing. Their sensors detected no weapons, no missiles, no attack of any kind. The ships were simply failing one after another for no reason that they could understand. On Earth, the human response was immediate. Cargo ships that had been hiding behind the moon roared to life. They were not warships. They were simple transport vessels designed to carry supplies between Earth and the lunar colonies. But in the past 72 hours, they had been transformed. Their hulls were now covered with hastily welded armor. Their cargo bays now held rail guns built from magnetic accelerators stolen from research laboratories. Lieutenant sat in the pilot's seat of one of these improvised warships. She was 26 years old. She had been a shuttle pilot before the invasion. Now she was something else. She was a soldier. "All ships, this is," she said into her radio. "Attack pattern Delta. Target the disabled vessels. Move fast, hit hard, get out before they recover." The human fleet swarmed the crippled ships like angry wasps. They were smaller, weaker, and far less advanced. But they were also faster, more maneuverable, and absolutely fearless. They had never faced an enemy that flew directly into their guns. They had never seen pilots who seemed to welcome death. Guided her ship toward a massive cruiser that was spinning slowly in the void. Its weapons were still firing, but blindly, hitting nothing. She brought her vessel alongside the alien hull and activated the magnetic locks. "Boarding team, go," she ordered. 12 humans in hastily modified spacesuits burst through the airlock. They carried weapons that were never designed for combat: mining lasers, construction tools, even sharpened metal bars. They moved through the alien ship with terrifying speed, clearing corridors and disabling systems. The crew had never experienced close combat. Their empire had conquered worlds with orbital bombardment for 300 cycles. They had no training for this kind of fighting. They did not know how to respond when small, fragile creatures came screaming through their doors with fire in their eyes. 4 hours later, stood on the bridge of the captured cruiser. The alien captain lay dead at her feet. The ship's systems were now under human control. She looked out through the viewing port at the distant blue dot of Earth. "Mission Control," she said, her voice steady despite the blood on her suit. "This is Lieutenant. The vessel is secured. We have captured an enemy warship. Repeat, we have captured an enemy warship." The response came back filled with static and disbelief. Nobody had believed this was possible. Nobody except the humans who had done it. Admiral sat in his command chair and stared at the reports. He had lost 17 ships in a single day. He had lost a cruiser to boarding action. He had lost more warriors in this engagement than in his entire military career. His second-in-command approached carefully. "Admiral, we should call for reinforcements." Nodded slowly. His confidence was gone. The cold feeling in his chest had grown into something larger, something he now recognized. It was fear. "Send the message," he said. "Tell the High Council that we need the full fleet. Tell them that we have underestimated these creatures." He paused and looked at the blue planet on his screen. "Tell them that the humans refuse to die." Far below, in her ruined warehouse, Lee sat down on a broken chair and closed her eyes. She was exhausted beyond words, but she was also smiling. They had done the impossible. They had hurt the invaders. They had proven that humanity would not go quietly into the darkness. And this was only the beginning. The reinforcement fleet arrived 6 weeks after the first battle. 400 warships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their silver hulls gleaming like a curtain of death across the sky. It was the largest military force the Empire had ever sent against a single world. It was enough firepower to burn every continent to glass and boil the oceans into steam. Admiral watched the fleet arrive with grim satisfaction. This time, there would be no mistakes. This time, the humans would learn the true meaning of defeat. But the humans had not been idle during those 6 weeks. They had been busy. Factories that once made cars now produced missiles. Universities that once taught philosophy now designed weapons. Workers who once built houses now constructed warships. Every nation on Earth, for the first time in human history, worked together under a single command. Old enemies became allies. Ancient grudges were forgotten. The entire species had united against a common threat. Commander Shin stood on the bridge of the Soul's Pride, the flagship of the newly formed Earth Defense Fleet. He was 43 years old. Before the invasion, he had been a cargo ship captain, moving supplies between Earth and Mars. Now he commanded 17 combat vessels. It was not enough. It was nowhere close to enough. But it was what they had. "Commander," his communications officer said, "the alien fleet is transmitting." "Put it through." Admiral's voice filled the bridge. "Humans, you have fought well, better than any species we have encountered, but this war is over. You are outnumbered and outmatched. Surrender now and we will spare your remaining cities. Resist and we will destroy everything you have ever built." Looked at his crew. They were young and old, experienced and untrained, frightened and determined. They knew the odds. They knew they would probably die, but none of them looked away. None of them suggested surrender. He pressed the transmit button. "Admiral, I have a message for you and your empire. We do not surrender, we do not give up. We do not break. You can destroy our cities. You can kill our people, but you cannot defeat us. Because for every one of us you kill, 10 more will rise to take their place. We are humanity, and we will never stop fighting." He cut the transmission and turned to his tactical officer. "Begin Operation Hornet." The human fleet did not engage directly. That would have been suicide. Instead, they scattered, hiding among the asteroid fields and debris that filled the solar system. The pursued, expecting an easy hunt. They found something very different. Private floated in the darkness of space, her small assault pod hidden behind a chunk of rock the size of a building. She was 19 years old. 3 months ago, she had been a university student studying engineering. Now she was part of a special unit trained for extravehicular combat. She carried equipment designed for asteroid mining. She was about to use it for something very different. "Target approaching," her team leader whispered through the radio. "Wait for my signal." A carrier drifted past, its massive engines glowing blue in the darkness. It was hunting the human fleet, unaware that it was being hunted in return. "Now!" Fired her thrusters and launched herself toward the carrier. She moved fast, too fast for the alien sensors to track. She landed on the hull with a magnetic thud and immediately began cutting through the armor with her mining laser. "I am through," she reported, moving to propulsion systems. She crawled through the alien ship's infrastructure, placing explosive charges at key points. The crew never knew she was there. They were looking for warships, not for a single human girl with a bag of explosives and absolutely no fear. 10 minutes later, the carrier's engines exploded. The ship drifted helplessly, its propulsion destroyed. Human interceptors swarmed from hiding and finished the job. This scene repeated itself across the solar system. They could not find the human fleet because there was no fleet to find. There were only small groups of desperate warriors, striking from shadows, vanishing before the enemy could respond. Admiral raged on his bridge as the casualty reports came in. 30 ships lost in a week, 50 ships lost in 2 weeks, supply lines attacked, fuel depots destroyed, ammunition stores captured. The humans were fighting a war unlike anything they had ever experienced. "They are not playing by the rules," his tactical officer complained. "They attack without warning, they retreat without shame, they hide instead of facing us properly." Slammed his fist against his command console. Because they do not care about rules, they care about winning. On Earth, Lee led a team of engineers in reverse engineering captured technology. They worked in underground bunkers, safe from orbital bombardment. Every day they learned something new. Every day they grew stronger. "Their shields are based on an energy frequency we can now detect," she explained to Commander Shin during a briefing. "If we modify our weapons to match that frequency, we can bypass their defenses." Shin nodded. "How long until we can implement this?" 2 weeks. "You have 1 week." Smiled. "Then we will work faster." Across the world, humanity adapted. They learned from every battle. They studied every captured piece of technology. They trained new soldiers, built new ships, developed new tactics. They had expected a quick conquest. Instead, they found themselves trapped in a war of attrition against an enemy that simply refused to stop. Returned from her 20th mission and received a medal for bravery. When a reporter asked how she felt about her accomplishments, she simply shrugged. "They came to our home. They killed our people. I am just returning the favor." The tide had not turned yet. The humans were still outnumbered but for the first time since the invasion began, the High Council began to wonder if they had made a terrible mistake. Because the humans were not getting weaker as the war continued. They were getting stronger. 4 months into the war, humanity achieved something that should have taken decades. They built their own hyperdrive. Doctor stood in the underground laboratory and watched as the engine hummed to life. She was 38 years old. She had spent her entire career studying theoretical physics. She had been funding, rejected by universities, and called a dreamer by her colleagues. Now she was looking at the most important invention in human history. "It works," she whispered. "It actually works." The hyperdrive was built from captured technology and human ingenuity. It was smaller than the alien version, more efficient, and in some ways more advanced. They had not improved their technology in 8,000 cycles. They had grown comfortable. They had stopped innovating. Humanity had no such luxury. Commander Shin arrived at the laboratory with Defense Minister. Both men stared at the glowing engine with wonder in their eyes. "How fast can we build more of these?" Shin asked. Smiled. "We already have 3 more in production. By next month we will have a dozen. By next year we will have hundreds." Nodded slowly. "Then it is time to take the war to them." The first human hyperdrive vessel was named Defiance. It was not a beautiful ship. It was ugly, angular, covered in welded armor and bristling with weapons. But it was fast, powerful, and completely human. Captain stood on the bridge and looked at his crew. 400 men and women, all volunteers, all knowing that they might never return home. They had trained for 2 months. They had studied every piece of intelligence about They were ready. "Set course for the supply station at the edge of their system," ordered. "It is time to show them what we can do." The Defiance jumped into hyperspace with a flash of light. For the first time in history, a human vessel traveled faster than light. For the first time, humanity reached beyond their own solar system. The supply station was a massive structure, filled with food, fuel, and ammunition for the invasion fleet. It was guarded by only a handful of ships. They had never imagined that anyone would attack them in their own territory. The Defiance dropped out of hyperspace like a hammer falling from the sky. Its weapons fired before they even knew what was happening. Rail guns tore through station walls. Missiles struck fuel tanks. Explosions bloomed in the vacuum of space. "Enemy ships moving to intercept," the tactical officer reported. "Good," said, "let them come." The battle lasted 3 hours. The Defiance destroyed the station, captured 2 supply ships, and escaped before reinforcements could arrive. The human crew suffered 12 casualties. The lost over 3,000 personnel and enough supplies to feed a fleet for a month. When the Defiance returned to Earth, it was greeted as a hero, but the celebrations were short. There was still work to do. Admiral received the news of the attack while sitting in his command chair. His scales had lost their shine. His eyes were tired. He had been fighting this war for 4 months, and he was no closer to victory than the day he arrived. "They attacked our supply station," his second-in-command reported. "They have developed hyperdrive technology." Closed his eyes. "That is not possible. It takes centuries to develop hyperdrive. They have had months." "Nonetheless, Admiral, they have done it." Sat in silence for a long moment. Then he made a decision that would have been unthinkable 4 months ago. He requested a communication channel with Earth. Defense Minister accepted the call. He sat in the Seoul Command Center, surrounded by maps and screens showing the current state of the war. He looked tired but calm. "Admiral," he said, "this is unexpected." His image appeared on the screen. The alien looked different than before. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something that looked almost like respect. "Minister, you have proven to be a worthy opponent, but this war cannot continue forever. What will it take to end this conflict?" Leaned back in his chair. "You came to our world, you killed our people, you burned our cities, and now you ask what it will take to end this." He paused and smiled that cold, dangerous smile. "You have been fighting us for 4 months. In that time we have gone from having no space combat capability to raiding your supply lines. Imagine what we will accomplish in a year, in 5 years, in a generation." Said nothing. He could not argue with the logic. "What do you want?" he finally asked. "Leave, never return, and tell every species in your empire what happens when you try to wage war on humanity." The communication ended. Sat alone on his bridge and thought about the impossible situation he was in. He could continue fighting. He might even win eventually, but the cost would be catastrophic. And even if he conquered Earth, he knew now that the humans would never stop resisting. They would fight from underground. They would fight from space. They would fight until every last one of them was dead. And even then, he was not sure they would stop. He opened a channel to the High Council. "I am requesting permission to negotiate a withdrawal," he said. "The humans cannot be conquered. They can only be destroyed completely, and I am not certain even that is possible." The council listened. They calculated the cost in ships and soldiers. They measured the risk of continued conflict against a species that grew stronger with every battle. They made their decision, from Earth on a cold morning in December. Their ships rose from orbit in perfect formation, silver blades against a sky. They did not fire a final shot. They did not make threats or promises. They simply left. Within 2 weeks, every alien vessel had departed the solar system. The war was over. But humanity's transformation could not be undone. The shipyards kept building. The factories kept producing weapons. The scientists kept developing new technologies. Young people who had watched their cities burn looked to the stars not with wonder but with purpose. They had seen what lived out there in the darkness. They had learned that the universe was not a friendly place. Admiral Park stood before the United Earth Council 6 months after the withdrawal. She was no longer a captain. The war had changed her, hardened her, turned her into something new. Her eyes held no fear, only determination. "They will tell others about us," she said, her voice carrying across the silent chamber. "They will describe us as dangerous, as violent, as unpredictable, as creatures that do not know when to surrender." She paused and looked at the faces around her. "Good, let them." She activated a holographic display showing a map of the galaxy. It was covered in markers, territory, other empires, unknown regions, and in one small corner, a tiny blue dot labeled Earth. "We were alone and unprepared when they came. That will never happen again. I am proposing the formation of a permanent defense force, a fleet capable of defending not just Earth but every world that asks for our protection. We will become the species that others hesitate to threaten." Councilwoman rose from her seat. She had lost her entire family in the first bombardment. Her eyes still held the grief of that day, but also something else, something harder. "And if another empire tries what the attempted?" Park's expression did not change. "Then they will learn the same lesson. We did not choose this war. We did not start this path, but we will finish it." The council voted unanimously in favor of the proposal. In the years that followed, humanity expanded across the solar system and beyond. They built colonies on Mars and the moons of Jupiter. They established outposts in distant star systems, and everywhere they went, they carried the memory of what had happened. Doctor continued her research, developing technologies that they could not imagine. Commander Shin became the first Supreme Commander of the United Earth Fleet. The teenage soldier who had destroyed carriers with mining equipment became a legendary figure, her story told to every new recruit. And Lee, the 67-year-old engineer who had built the first disruption field in a converted warehouse, became the most celebrated scientist in human history. She died peacefully at the age of 93, surrounded by students who would carry her work forward. Far away in space, Admiral stood before the High Council to explain his failure. The chamber was vast and cold, filled with silver-scaled elders who had never known defeat. They stared at him with contempt. "You had 400 ships," the Supreme Chancellor said. "You had technology beyond their understanding. You had centuries of conquest experience. And you failed. Explain." Stood straight despite his shame. He had thought about this moment many times. He had prepared his words carefully. "They are small," he began. "Their bodies are fragile. Their lives are short. By every measure we use, they should be weak." He paused. "But they are not weak. They are something we have never encountered before." "Explain," the Chancellor demanded again. "They adapt," said. "They learn. They change. In 4 months, they went from primitive space travel to hyperspace capability. In 4 months, they developed weapons that could penetrate our shields. In 4 months, they transformed their entire civilization into a war machine." He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every elder. "But that is not what makes them dangerous. What makes them dangerous is that they do not stop. They do not surrender. They do not accept defeat. You can kill them, but their children will continue the fight. You can destroy their cities, but they will build new ones. You can burn their world, and they will fight you from the ashes." The chamber was silent. "They turn their dead into monuments," continued. "They turn their grief into fury. They fight when victory is impossible because they refuse to accept impossibility, and they learn from every battle. Every defeat makes them stronger. Every victory makes them more confident." He took a deep breath. "Do not engage the humans. Do not threaten their world. Do not test their resolve, because they will rise to meet any challenge and they will not stop until they have won, or until every last one of them is dead." He paused. "And even then, I believe they would find a way to fight from beyond the grave." The High Council dissolved the invasion initiative that same day. Warning beacons were placed at the edge of human space. The message broadcast by these beacons was simple and direct. "Danger inhabited system. Do not approach. Species designation human. Status hostile. Threat level maximum. Special notes: they do not surrender. They do not forget. They do not forgive. Let them be." The warning spread across 100 star systems. Species that had never heard of Earth learned the name human. They learned to fear it. On Earth, Admiral Park stood on a balcony overlooking the rebuilt city of Seoul. The scars of the invasion were still visible, empty lots where buildings had stood, memorials to the fallen, children who would never know their parents. But new construction rose everywhere. The city was healing. The species was healing. A young officer approached her. "Admiral, we have received a communication from the collective. They are requesting protection from expansion." Park nodded slowly. They would never attack Earth again, but that did not mean they had stopped conquering. There were other species out there, species that could not defend themselves. "Tell them we will consider their request," she said, "and begin planning for a delegation." The officer saluted and departed. Park remained on the balcony, watching the sun set over the city that had refused to die. They had tried to wage war on humanity. They had failed. And now the universe would learn what humanity could become when it stopped fighting itself and started reaching for the stars. The age of human expansion had begun.